Hello there, my channel, War Chronicle, and today we'll talk about the Russian Civil War. Now, where do we start? Yes, the end of World War I. Germany is collapsing. The Central Powers are collapsing. Russia is collapsing. And when I say Russia's collapsing, I mean it literally. The Russian Empire is crumbling from within and without. In 1917, the February Revolution overthrew the Romanov dynasty in Russia. A new government was formed, but it wasn't exactly stable. There were still loyalist troops in some parts of the empire, and the public was not yet fully on board with the new government. That was until the October Revolution, which brought the Bolsheviks into power. The country was now known as the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, or just the Russian Soviet Republic. But hold on, because Russia had not yet left World War I. They were still fighting the Germans on the Eastern Front. In March 1918, after the new government came to power, they signed an armistice with Germany. It was called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. This was actually one of the first major foreign policy achievements of the Bolshevik government. Now, the peace treaty was not good for Russia. Central Powers gained a lot of territory from them. Here is how the new borders looked like after the signing of the treaty. The Russians lost Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, East Prussia, parts of Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states. Basically, all of this region right here went to Germany, Austria-Hungary, Turkey, and the Ottoman Empire. Now, the situation in Russia was messy. Many people did not accept the new borders. In Ukraine, for example, many people wanted to join the Ukrainian People's Republic, which declared independence from both Imperial Russia and Soviet Russia. So the Soviets had to fight against the Ukrainians in what became known as the Russian-Ukrainian Civil War. The Poles also weren't too happy about losing all this territory, so they started their own Polish-Soviet War. Meanwhile, anti-Bolshevik Russians who refused to accept the new borders fled Russia and formed various anti-Bolshevik governments in exile. These included the Russian All-Russian government led by Prince Lebev and the Russian national government led by General Alexeyev. Both were monarchist and wanted to restore the Romanov dynasty in Russia. In addition to these two, there was also the Czechoslovak government in exile, which wanted to restore Czechoslovakia, which was occupied by the Austrians. Since 1914, these governments in exile then formed a sort of coalition army known as the White Army. On paper, the White Army was made up of Russians, Ukrainians, Poles, Germans, and Czechs. However, most of the soldiers in the White Army were actually Russians. The White Army was not a unified force, though. It was made up of many different units from different regions with different leaders. On the other side of the conflict stood the Red Army. The Red Army was much better organized and disciplined than the White Army. It was loyal to the Communist Party, and its main goal was to keep the territories of the Russian Soviet Republic safe. To accomplish this, they used Soviet secret police, Cheka, which was tasked to eliminate potential enemies of the state. Most of them were nobles and landowning peasants who fled to the countryside. The Civil War began in May 1918. The first major battle was the Battle of Kazan. The Reds won this one. Then the Whites took Samara. Then the Reds took Samara back. Back and forth, city after city. By September, the Reds had taken all of the Volga region. The Whites could now only be found in the former Russian Empire's western regions. During this time, the Western Allies intervened in the conflict. Britain, France, the US, and Japan sent troops to help the Whites. Their goal was to prevent Bolshevik Russia from becoming a global communist state. So the Whites were able to launch a major offensive in 1919. They pushed the Reds all the way to Smolensk, but that was as far as they could go. The Reds launched a counteroffensive and pushed the Whites all the way to Belarus. The Whites were unable to recover from this. They retreated to Estonia and Latvia. This was the end of the war. The Soviets had won. The peace treaties were humiliating for Russia. The Western Allies withdrew their support, and Russia was now firmly a communist state. Let's see how this happened. We're going to do it region by region. The main goal of the Whites was to capture Moscow and then move south and take control of the Volga region, which was at the time the center of Russian industry. The problem was that they never managed to capture Moscow. Sure, they got close, but the Reds defended the city fiercely, and the Whites never launched a full-scale assault on the city. Instead, they focused their efforts on the northern part of the Northern Sea Route. This was due to British pressure. You see, the British were afraid that if the Reds took over Siberia, the Japanese would lose their access to it. So the British pressured the Whites to focus their efforts on capturing the Northern Sea Route. This worked out well for the Reds, because it meant that the Whites didn't threaten Moscow. The Reds, meanwhile, focused on the southern part of the sea route. This was done mainly with the Red Cavalry under the command of Budyonny and Tukhachevsky. In the south, the Reds fought against Denekin's volunteer army. Denekin's forces were loyal to the Russian national government, and he commanded most of the White Army in the southern part of Russia. Budyonny and Tukhachevsky's troops met Denekin's army in the Battle of Katarinad. The Reds won this battle and pushed Denikin all the way to the Black Sea coast. There was no retreat for Denikin's army. The Kuban Sea was blocked by the Reds, so Denikin and his men were forced to surrender. While all this was happening, the Reds were taking care of the Eastern Front. Yekaterinburg was the key to the entire front. As soon as the Reds took the city, the Trans-Siberian Railway was theirs. However, it wasn't easy to take Yekaterinburg. The Reds had to fight against several Cossack groups and foreign powers. First, they defeated the Czechs in the Battle of Selyabinsk. Then they fought against the Japanese in the Battle of Omsk. After that, they captured Novosibirsk. Finally, they took Yekaterinburg. With the railway secured, the Reds marched west and relieved the siege of Samara. The Reds then pushed the Whites all the way to Ufa. Meanwhile, on the northern front, things were also going well for the Reds. By July, they had pushed the Whites all the way to Estonia and Latvia. This was the end of the war. The Reds had won. Let's take a look at a map of Russia at this time. This is how the borders of Russia looked like after the Russian Civil War. The Reds had managed to keep all of the territories that they gained during the October Revolution. The Whites' demands for autonomy were rejected, and the Reds were not interested in giving any territory to the Poles or Ukrainians. Even Finland was offered Karelia, but they refused. Now let's see what happened to all of the people involved. First, the Romanovs. Nicholas II and his wife Alexandra were executed along with their children in Yekaterinburg. Then the leader of the Russian Provisional Government, Alexander Kerensky, fled to Paris, where he lived until his death in 1970. Also, the leader of the Russian National Government, General Alexeyev, was killed in action. Finally, the Bolshevik leaders, Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky, were able to establish communism in Russia. So that's the end of our video. Hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. If you did, please hit the like button. If you really liked it, consider subscribing. It helps a lot. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.